Got a question. What do Legos, finger paint, Play-Doh have in common with the game of real estate? Stick around and find out. My name's Anthony Agostino. I'm here on behalf of Rugged Real Estate, and we're here to actually talk about the games, the mind games of real estate. Now, I'd ask you, what do Legos, finger paint, Play-Doh, and real estate all have in common? Any ideas? They're all powered by your imagination. Believe it or not, the whole thing is powered by your imagination. You can make Legos whatever you want. Finger paints, it's a blank slate, whatever you want. Play-Doh, again, a chunk of clay becomes whatever you want. Real estate, it's the exact same thing. But it's deceptive because in the game of real estate, there's a house. But if we're going to play the game like Play-Doh and Legos, the only difference between Legos, Play-Doh, and a house is instead of clay and plastic, we stacked up pieces of wood. We made it what we wanted. But where does the mind game come in? Again, we made it what we wanted. We said, this was mine. I own this house. We have a little piece of paper and we call it a deed and we take it with us and we're like, this is mine. But we're actually playing a game between different ideas of possession, ownership, and control. And depending on how you see yourself in the equation will determine what it is you get out of the game. So for example, if you're a person looking to live somewhere, you'll go to somebody else and you'll say, can I live inside of your house? That would be a tenant, or a homeowner can actually have possession of the house. They can physically touch the house. They walk around in the house. Now that's another conversation by itself. On a side note, I did go to law school. It took, you take real property, you take other classes, and you kind of realize the paper game. I mean, law school is really just the paper game. How do we document the mental constructs that we come up with? Because at the end of the day, I can hold this in my hand. But when I put it down, I still own it. How is that possible? Possession, ownership. How is that possible? Only by an agreement between people. That is mine. This we call a receipt. If I get a piece of paper called a receipt, this is mine. If I get a deed, this is mine. Now that it's mine, by agreement, see, the tenant has possession of it. But it goes more than that. The owner, mine, claims ownership of it. But if you actually study real estate, you don't actually own the property. You never own the property. Once again, it's a piece of paper. And you get what they call a bundle of rights. That's it. You never actually own the property. It's a bundle of rights. But you call it ownership. And the only thing you're really ever getting is a limited set of authorities or permission. By who? The person or the party that has ultimate control. Each person, each party in this arrangement claims to have something on this house. All made up in your head. Tenant moves in. This is my house. I live here. That's the version of the game that they played. This person, the landlord, says, this is my house, and they feel empowered. Well, let me back up. The tenant feels empowered because they have a lease. The owner feels empowered because they have a deed. The state feels empowered, well, because they have guns. But because we have statutes, rules, and authorities that say that the state can do this. Now, the bank is also involved, funding sources, and they get involved because they have contracts. Sorry, in law school, K is contracts. They have contracts, and they put liens, and they have rules on their side. So they're also involved in the real estate transaction, and they never have to touch the building. They don't even have to see the building. And they have more control over the overall bit of the property. They have more protection than the landlord. Follow me. If you use the word landlord, you're led to believe you're on the top. You are in control. Well, the interesting part is you're not. Because who comes first? The state and the feds. Then, if you use you have your local community, and then you have the banker, the lending sources, they're protected before you are. Then you have things like the contractors. They can put liens on the property. Then you have tenants who have rights by contract. Then you've got these other sources. Who's the last person to get paid? Who is the absolute contractual, real world person to get paid, but at the same time bears the burden of satisfying every single one of these parties? You see, you look at the different ones, they all have, let's see, the lender never has to show up, but they have contractual, legal, statutory protections. The contractor only has to show up on 1 or 2 days, whatever he agreed to, goes in, goes out, does his thing. The tenant, they only have to pay their rent, and they only have to not rip the building up. You're responsible for everything, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have legal, statutory, contractual protections. And their only liability, don't rip it up and pay your rent. That's it. Their exposure is that. The last person on the list, the last person to get paid is the landlord. But if you looked at the, learning how to do this. If you looked at this, the tenant has possession, the state, the bank, and the tenant have control over the property, because you now have to, once the tenant takes possession of the property, you now have to give him notice. You now have to tell him things. You now have to ask him things. He kind of takes on the contractual agreements that you have. Egress, who he lets in, who he doesn't let in, who he excludes, to a limited extent, what he does to the property or how he experiences the property, whether it's a triple net lease, whether it's a basic, typical lease. They control. You have ownership, or this person has ownership, but with that, they also have liability. So once again, is this actually a thing? Can you actually go somewhere and pick up ownership? No. The deed does not, you're not possessing a house when you have the deed. If you put the deed in your back pocket and you go off to the desert and nobody ever sees the deed, nobody knows that you own the property. If nobody knows that piece of paper exists, nobody knows. We're back to possession and control. We have a thing called adverse possession. If somebody, technology, if somebody takes control of the property, but they don't have anything and they just say they do and they think they do, that's adverse possession. And if they do it for a long enough period of time, adverse possession in its beginning starts as a trespass. But if they play the game long enough and you don't stop them as the owner, their trespass, their crime, can actually mature to a set of rights. There's a whole lot more to it, which is actually they mature into rights, and the actual owner sort of loses their right to claim otherwise. So if the trespasser who matures through adverse possession makes a claim to court that they own the property, then they own the property because you are stopped. You cannot, as the owner, make a claim. All because the person or the party in control wants the highest and best use of the property. So while it may look like ownership is the apex of the pyramid and the landlord is the person in control, they actually have the highest level of risk, because even if they lose the property in a worst case scenario to adverse possession or something else, they might still owe the bank money. They might still owe contractors money. There's a whole lot that goes into this. But once again, I started this out with, what do these three things have in common with real estate? It's a very common idea to get wrapped up in the 2x4s, the sticks, the things, because at the end of the day, to further this little analogy of what's in your head, at the end of the day, are you here for the physical house? No. You're here for the income stream, the appreciation, and the tax write-offs, or maybe some emotional thing that you're going through. So once again, money, you can go down that rabbit hole. It doesn't really exist. It's just an idea of measuring what you want, what I want, and how we're going to trade it back and forth. And I can go down a whole rabbit hole with that. Appreciation is a theoretical concept of desire. Again, all in the head. It's just not you. There's other people. Appreciation is the idea of, how much do I think I might be able to sell this house to somebody else if I were to sell it. You don't even have to sell it to gain equity. It's just the potential gap between what you paid and what somebody else might pay. So to that end, for example, value is really what somebody paid. You can't know the value of a property until somebody closes on it. And that's another argument on taxes and property taxes. If properties are taxed on their appraised value, but you just paid $100,000, but theoretically you could get 150 and they're taxing you at the 150%, $150,000 rate, your value is really just 100,000, or arguably, because that's what you paid for it. But anyways, going on. So this is a theory. Appreciation is a theory. A tax write-off is literally an arrangement with the person who has control, or the party that has control over the land and the money, not just theoretically control over your money. They invented the money. It's theirs. They gave it to you. They give it back. They demand, all in your head. They're all just theories. They're all agreements between people, which goes to almost day one, week one of real property in law school. You go over this concept of ownership. Ownership really has nothing to do with an item and a person. Ownership has to do with the agreement between two people. If you have something in your hand and the other person agrees not to try to take it from you, even if you put it down on the floor, you own it by agreement. And to that end, small note, people talk about living legacy or leaving things in your will. Another concept off of here. Dead people have no rights. You have a will, but you're not, it's not a constitutional item. It's a construct of the court system in the state that you were, Again, all of the whole game, everything you're doing, every single one of the parties is an agreement that this is what we're going to do. You never actually own the house. You never actually control the house. You never 100%, never exclusively. So to that end, if you realize if you're here for money, or you're here for appreciation or tax write-offs, you're not really here for the house. The house isn't the destination. The house is a vehicle in your head. It's the method you've chosen to get to where you're going. And so to that end, technology. The big game, why are we all here? Winning? Are you winning? Are you losing? I know people in the game of real estate that are working 80 to 100 hours a week or more. They think they're winning. There are people out here that are, how would we paint this? Financially upside down on all the properties. They're paying money every month to own the property. They don't realize it, but they are. They still think they're winning. We have sellers who come to the table and they sell a house at a loss. They still think they're winning. The buyer comes in, buys the house below the appraised value, and they think they're winning, only to later find out that they had to overpay for stuff and they're exhausted and they're threatened. So are they really winning or losing? The whole thing, winning, losing, ownership title. This entire game, this entire process, all of this, everything you're doing, whether you're winning or losing, it's all your creation. You decide. This is a perfectly constructed choose your own adventure kind of thing. And if you're going to ask me, I'll repeat what I've done before in other sessions. You might see it. You want to get to this outcome. So then you have to create the situation. And before you create the situation, you have to do some personal development. That is what all of this is. You're deciding with your pieces, with your toys, with the things you have available, what winning and losing means to you and how you're going to create the ideal win in your situation. Are you going to DIY it? Is doing it yourself, struggling 24/7, a win? Because then you feel independent, you feel free. Is the do it with someone model what you're going to want? Which again, you're always doing it with somebody else, but just deciding who you're doing it with. Is that what you want to do? Because that makes you feel connected and secured, like you're part of a team. So the person that wants to be independent is looking for a different win, a trophy that looks different. So here, or like I ended up doing, done for you. In other words, you just write a check. That's your role. You just write a check and you get payments at the end of the month. It's like my partner, Mark, when we first met, and I ended up investing with him. Before we got together, I was a real estate investor. I was in a life before, I was an aircraft mechanic. I was other things. And when I bought these houses, I was doing everything all the time by myself to aviation standards. It was ridiculous. It was exhausting. But I was determined to be DIY because I thought that being independent was the highest thing. And I was exhausted. And one day I was literally pacing back and forth. I'm a real estate investor. I am a real estate investor. I am a real estate investor. And then Richard Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad, EISB, came into my head. And in a single moment, I realized, no, wait a minute. I'm not. I'm self-employed. Because if I don't show up to the job site, nothing happens. I don't own a business. I am in the business. I am not an investor. I am self-employed. I'm doing the remodeling. I'm doing the buying. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I've given myself 5 or 6 separate jobs. And I decided, like, what would make me an investor? And I thought, oh, using my money and my intelligence. And I went straight from here down to here. And I quite literally told my business partner, Mark, when he came to me with an idea, I want a check at the end of the month. I want a K1 at the end of the year. And do not tell me anything about the properties because I don't want to know. I'm not here for the house. I'm here for something larger. My time. I didn't need to be DIY anymore. The standard I set were choices. I wanted the freedom of choice to do what I wanted. And I didn't want to have to show up at 10 o'clock at night and do a plumbing. I didn't want to have to show up on the weekend and hear about the air conditioning. I didn't want to do it with somebody. I didn't need anybody to know I was the landlord. I didn't need anybody to know how many houses I had. Again, my priority was this. I had choices. From those choices, okay, I was actually able to go to law school because the number one thing that I had, time. And when I walked into law school, I said to myself, how do I get wealthier, happier, healthier, fitter, stronger, all these things coming out of law school than when I went into law school? And I went straight from DIY to done for you. I wrote a check and that was it. But that was my choice. Now you get to be the author of your story. And if you'd like to find out more about how this goes, how you can select where you want to be, how you want to be the author of your story, reach out, join the mastermind, get in contact. You know, calls are free. You want to write an email, connect us. We're just normal people sitting in an office. And if we can help you along the journey, I'd love to get with you and see what you're doing, what you're up to in the world. Take care.